is taking riders on a trip through central Quebec this summer. It's for tourists and travels along a 2.5-hour stretch of central Quebec that goes to the Charlevoix region. Robert McLemmon is with us to talk about this unique train and the possibilities of hydrogen power for this kind of travel. He's a professor of environmental studies at Wilfrid Laurier University. We reached him in Cambridge.
Hi, Ismaila.
So how are most trains powered right now?
Well, there's two options. The most common one for freight trains and intercity rail is a diesel engine, which, is a fossil fuel. It releases pollutants. It also releases greenhouse gases. That's something we want to get rid of. So the other option is electric motors, which is what we use, for example, in subway trains or street railways, any trains that make a lot of frequent trips over short distances. And those trains, they need access to either an electrified third rail or some overhead electric cabling, something we're not likely to install across the long distances here in Canada. This train in Quebec, it also has electric motors on it, but it makes its own electricity using something called a hydrogen fuel cell, which if listeners want to imagine a big flashlight battery with a positive and a negative terminal and some chemical compound in between called an electrolyte, if we add hydrogen to that cell, it will generate an electric current, which is how we power the motor on this train.
And also, it will release water as well, right?
That's right, yeah, water vapor, steam. Yeah, there's no air pollution and no greenhouse gases emitted.
Okay, how do we get our hydrogen right now?
There's two ways of doing it. The easiest way is to take methane or natural gas out of the ground, to steam it and separate the hydrogen atoms from it. The problem with that process, those two problems, one is that we're starting with a greenhouse gas as our fuel stock, and then the process itself releases carbon dioxide into the air. So unless we're capturing that carbon dioxide and putting it back in the ground, we're making a green fuel, but we're using a dirty process to make it. What they're doing in Quebec is they're using a different type of process called electrolysis. So if you can imagine a vat of water with a plastic membrane down the middle of it, if we were to run an electric current through the water, we can force the hydrogen atoms to separate from the oxygen in the water and to migrate to one side of that membrane where we can capture them and then use them as our fuel. That process creates no pollution, and in Quebec, where they're doing this right now, virtually all of the electricity is hydroelectric power, so there's no greenhouse gas emissions to run the manufacturing process, so we have a green process and a green fuel for our train.
If you were to look at the state that we're in right now with the industry, how much of the production generally of hydrogen would sit in that first process, and how much of it is in this electrolysis process? How much of it comes from each?
Yeah, so the methane process is the cheapest and easiest, and so the reality is that when people do need hydrogen, that's often where they go to first, especially in places like, in Western Canada, for example, where there's a lot of fossil fuel available, so that's the feedstock. But in a place like Quebec or in Newfoundland, for example, they're building hydrogen production facilities where they're actually creating wind farms to generate the electricity specifically to run the electrolysis process. So that's sort of the direction we're going to be going in coming decades, is this sort of non-fossil fuel, non-greenhouse gas method for making hydrogen.
Are there any other limitations to hydrogen energy other than the fact that we're still kind of working out the cleanest way to produce it?
Yes, so I mean, one is that unlike, say, gasoline or diesel, it's not a liquid fuel. It needs to be kept in pressurized containers, much, like the way we transport propane or liquefied natural gas. So there's, considerations in that respect. But the other thing is that we just really haven't got the infrastructure in place to generate large amounts of hydrogen fuel right now, because, it does not exist just in nature. We do have to make it. And until we've had this example of a train to work towards, we have not had a lot of applications so far come on stream here in Canada. So, for example, there's a company in BC that makes hydrogen fuel cell powered buses. The company's called Ballard. They've experimented with hydrogen powered automobiles out on the West Coast as well. But again, it's the infrastructure to actually make and transport and store the hydrogen fuel. That has been the real limitation so far.
So this is going to be used in this train that'll travel through this, finite period of time through parts of Quebec. When could we see this expanded to the rest of Canada?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, to us, this is kind of futuristic, a train that doesn't make any smoke or anything like that. But this particular model of train is actually in operation already in Germany. There's 14 of them ferrying passengers around the Hamburg area. And in Europe, they plan to have 20% of their passenger trains running on hydrogen over the next 10 to 15 years. So for them, it's already, the future is now. For us, we still are just getting used to this idea. Obviously, it's a demonstration program it's a French manufacturer who makes this particular model of train, trying to convince North Americans that, hey, it works. You can make the fuel locally. There's no greenhouse gas emissions. I know that CP Rail is starting to experiment with converting some of its existing diesel-powered locomotives to hydrogen fuel cells out in Alberta as a trial project as well. So I think we're going to start to see it increasingly rapidly here in North America. And not just for trains, but there's lots of other large industrial applications we could use it for. So steel making, for example, or making ocean-going ships travel on hydrogen instead of bunker fuel. So there's lots of opportunities here.
I should also ask just about safety. I mean, when hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, combines with air, we know it becomes quite explosive. Is there any concern around safety when it comes to hydrogen cells and hydrogen fuel?
It's one of the things that people have been concerned about for a while, but they've been experimenting with hydrogen buses and automobiles for over 20 years now. So there actually are hydrogen-powered cars in California driving around, and they're no more dangerous than gasoline-powered automobiles because it is a pressurized fuel, but the tanks that they make to store the hydrogen in, they use the same material as you would use in a bulletproof vest. So essentially, it's probably safer than a tank of gasoline on a regular automobile. Plus the advantage is that if you get a hole in your gas tank, the gas leaks on the ground, you've got a liquid fuel that's sitting there ready to go up in flames. Whereas with hydrogen, if you get a small leak in the tank, it actually just goes up into the air and combines with the oxygen, and there's no explosion and there's no combustion. It's only if you have a spontaneous kind of event where you'll get an explosion, and that's really not going to occur on a train or a bus or an automobile.
Do you think a hydrogen cell powered train, is that the end game for train transportation, or is it a stepping stone to another type of greener transportation?
Well, I think in the Canadian environment, where we have long distances and relatively infrequent trains, hydrogen is probably going to be our best option to diesel. In Europe, where the distances are a little bit shorter and the trains are more frequent, they will electrify a lot more of the rails than we will here. What I'd like to see is us using a lot more intercity hydrogen trains and get rid of, the short-haul flights between Toronto and Montreal and Ottawa. I mean, that would be the best way to get greenhouse gas emissions out of the transport sector, would be to move in that direction.
This is very, very neat. Robert, it's been great to speak with you. Thanks for this.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Robert Fleming is an environmental studies professor at Wilfrid Laurier University. We reached him in Cambridge.
I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Tonight on The World This Weekend, how a recent court case in the U.S. state of Montana could inspire more climate litigation here in Canada. A group of young people is suing the state for failing to take action on climate change, and Canadians are watching closely.
Canadian courts can look to see what other courts are deciding and how they're deciding that, and that can be really helpful because the issues presented by climate lawsuits are really novel.
That's on The World This Weekend, 6 p.m. on CBC Radio or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. It is 8:25 right now, and Sudbury's Northern Lights Festival in L'Oreal is happening this weekend. It is one of the oldest festivals in the country. It was started back in 1972. If you got tickets, you have a chance to see Amoye perform tonight and tomorrow afternoon. Here's Amoye right now with her song Chess.
that. No, level up off your time, but them here just fall right back, fall right back. Unsure what you want to feel life, and you dictate that. So when I got you move, take your time, do it, you can. Just make moves when you want, everybody say you can't do that. Level up off your time, but them here just fall right back, fall right back. Tell them your moves, don't do it. Don't show them your cards, don't do it. Leave them guessing, the whole time stressing too bad. Oh, so sad. Just don't tell them your moves, don't do it. Don't show them your cards, don't do it. Leave them guessing, the whole time stressing too bad. Oh, so sad. Just make moves when you want, everybody say you can't do that. No. Level up off your time, make them here just fall right back, fall right back. Make moves like a champion and keep your eyes on the prize. 1, 2, 3 steps ahead, never catch me falling behind. Only the fittest of the fittest shall survive. In this my life, stay standing up on your grind. Make moves when you want, everybody say you can't do that. Level up the way time, when the here just fall right back, fall right back. Show what you want to feel life, and you dictate that. So when I tell you move, take your time, do it, you can. Don't tell them your moves, don't do it. Don't show them your cards, don't do it. Leave them guessing, the whole time stressing too bad. Oh, so sad. Just don't tell them your moves, don't do it. Don't show them your cards, don't do it. Leave them guessing, the whole time stressing too bad. Oh, so sad. Just make moves when you want, everybody say you can't do that. Level up off your time, make them here just fall right back, fall right back. Go on, do it. Making moves now. Play the game smarter and don't waste time. Play your game wiser, be a master, captain of your life. Start a new chapter and show them the gas of his stride. Cause in this game of life, we stay winning, we win every time. Just make moves when you want, everybody say you can't do that. Level up off your time, with them here just fall right back, fall right back. Unsure what you want to feel life, and you dictate that. So when I tell you move, take your time, do it, you can. Don't tell them your moves, don't do it. Don't show them your cards, don't do it. Leave them guessing, the whole time stressing too bad. Oh, so sad. Just don't tell them your moves, don't do it. Don't show them your cards, don't do it. Leave them guessing, the whole time stressing too bad. Oh, so sad. Just make moves when you want, everybody say you can't do that. Level up off your time, make them here just fall right back, fall right back.
That is Chess by Amoye. You can find her at Sudbury's Northern Lights Festival Boreal all weekend long. And maybe you'll be taking somebody out to their first concert. We asked you about your first concert ever, and Joe Mather from Sydenham emailed us saying, the first concert I ever went to was with my boyfriend, now my husband, and we've been married for 50 years. It was early 1970s. We went to see the Hollies at a nightclub in Blackburn near Manchester in the UK. An amazing experience for sure. I'd love to hear from you as well. Email freshair@cbc.ca. CBC News is next.
This is CBC News. From From CBC Toronto, here is your news at 8:30. In Toronto, it's 17 degrees and mostly cloudy. In Windsor, 21 degrees and cloudy. And in Thunder Bay, 14 degrees and partly cloudy. Good morning. I'm Sarah McMillan. Toronto police have identified the suspect wanted for a daytime stabbing this week on board a TTC subway train. Dale Manukduk has the details.
Toronto police have named 25-year-old Moses Lewin of Toronto. He's wanted for the attempted murder of a man in his 30s. The incident happened on Thursday near Eglinton Station. According to police, two men got into an argument on a southbound train around noon. A graphic video circulating online appeared to show two men engaged in a fight before one pulled out a knife. The man with the knife then chased the other while frightened transit riders scattered. A spokesperson for the TTC says several people activated the emergency system. A police description released on Thursday said the suspect was wearing a gray hooded sweater with a gap on the front, black pants, black shoes, and was carrying a green backpack. Lewin is also wanted for aggravated assault, assault with a weapon, and 2 counts of failing to comply with a release order. The victim was originally sent to hospital with life-threatening injuries. His condition has since been upgraded to stable. Anyone with information about Thursday's stabbing is being asked to contact police. Dale Manukduk, CBC News, Toronto.
Many Torontonians probably remember the images of flooded streets, destroyed basements, and a submerged GO train from a historic storm in 2013. It's been 10 years since that day, and a lot has changed since then. Jennifer Drake is an associate professor at Carleton University and one of Canada's leading experts in stormwater management. She was teaching at the University of Toronto at the time.
It was really fascinating to live and to see firsthand, because this is the type of events that we, as an engineer, teach about and learn how to design our infrastructure for. So I remember a lot going down to the Humber River during the rainstorm and actually seeing how much it inundated. You had rocks that were the size of cars that were part of bank hardening and picked up and moved, hundreds of meters.
The city says today Toronto is much more resilient and it continues to invest in flood prevention measures.